Saasha, really appreciate you taking the time today to sit down and have a conversation, and really interested to discuss your background and your upbringing and journey through strategy work, really, to what you've built and are driving today. Mm-hmm. So maybe to begin with, if you could just give a quick introduction to yourself and the work that you're doing today as well.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here. My name's Saasha Celestial-One. I'm currently co-founder and COO of Olio, which is an app on a mission to put an end to waste by connecting people to share their surplus, specifically food. I've been doing that for 10 years. Before that, I had a small business which really gave me the entrepreneurial bug. But prior to that, I spent 13 years in the corporate world, first in investment banking, then as a strategy consultant at McKinsey for nearly 4 years, which is what brought me from New York to London, and where I've been ever since for the last 20 years. And then also in strategy and business development at American Express.
Fantastic. And it's quite a journey from, and we've obviously discussed this previous to recording this now, but it's quite a journey from what you described as the corporate world and McKinsey and really that foundation in strategy work through to what you're doing today, which we'll get into. What was your foundation, because you also have an MBA from Stanford, so what was your first experience of working within the world of strategy and consulting, obviously from your MBA through to the work at McKinsey?
So I really was at that point in my life where I was a grown woman, but I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so for me, going into strategy consulting helped buy me time whilst I was exposed to lots of new ideas, learned lots of really practical approaches to problem solving and problem structuring, got to lead teams. I just was really drawn to the sort of project-based approach where you get, in theory, I often did, a big meaty problem to solve, you've got all the resources and you've got a set period of time. It felt very playful in a lot of ways, as opposed to having like quite a routine BAU type of role. So that is what sort of drew me into it. There were things about it I absolutely loved, everything I learned. I definitely am a bit of a disciple in terms of how I go about approaching my work. Like It does get quite embedded into that hypothesis-driven approach to problem solving. And that's how I coach my team today. And it's really important. My co-founder's also, she's ex-BCG, not Bain.
She wouldn't have let you get away with that.
Yeah. It's easy to forget. So I think it's been really helpful for us in leadership roles at our own company. What drew me into it is sort of as I described. At the time, there was some projects that were really interesting and lived up to my expectations. There were others that were just sort of, I got really burnt out at, and I sort of realized that I wasn't going to be a career consultant if that's what was required of me. But I was really glad that I could take those skills and sort of export them into American Express, which I sort of joined their internal strategy function at the time, which ran internal sort of management consulting projects, sometimes in collaboration with external consultants as well. And I was drawn to that because it's a big, well-known global brand, and they were doing lots of interesting things that they needed sort of strategic support on. So I don't think I was ever going to be a lifelong consultant, but the skill set is definitely something that has stuck with me, and I think is a cornerstone of how has been really of my success, if I say it today.
And the skill set I think you're pertaining to the most is around problem solving, which inherently strategy work is around problem solving, because we're speaking about the future and the future isn't known.
Yeah.
What are the specifics that you picked up, yes, through your work at McKinsey, but also through the work at American Express?
It's weird because a lot of it is so second nature now, and it sort of only becomes apparent to me that it is a skill set when I'm sort of speaking or working with team members who don't necessarily have that. But it's, taking a large unknown, breaking it down into sort of just mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive components, to try and basically then develop, reverse engineer a set of hypotheses that you can then test through gathering data or information to get you to iterate on, to get closer and closer to a more informed view or even a recommendation about a course of action to help achieve or solve whatever the big unknown is. And as I say those, that sound like a lot of words. Like I can picture how I approach it, and I'm not sure if it'd be clear to the casual listener what I mean, but it is just a methodology that is like quite formulaic and in terms of like being rigorous about how you go about structuring and solving problems in my mind, and also using data and information to prove or disprove hypotheses really quickly to just iterate on getting closer and closer to a strong point of view.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And as you said, it is a lot of words, but it's a lot of very clear and relatively concise explanation of what strategy work is. I'm going to wait a second for the police car to go past.
Not the ice cream truck.
Not the ice cream truck this time. But it's a very clear and concise explanation of what strategy work is. Flipping on its head a little bit though, within your work at McKinsey and your exposure to clients, as well as the work in the internal strategy team of a truly large corporate, what were the big challenges that you saw, both from the client side in execution or internally within American Express? What did that look like?
Well, I can probably more easily answer to American Express because unfortunately often what happens, at least for me in my experience at McKinsey, is you completed a project and then you sort of moved on to the next one. I think I did 13 projects during my just under 4 years there. So at the time I really didn't have excellent or even much visibility at all into the challenges implementing the recommendations. But that came sharply into focus once I was internal at an organization, because you can have, so many of the challenges I think have to do with just the buy-in from the right. You can't sort of have consulting or strategy work done to you. Like if you don't have the right buy-in, either senior level buy-in or sort of execution level buy-in, then things have a way of getting deprioritized, shelved, just being done halfway and not yielding results. Or it's sort of like the opposite of confirmation bias. If you're in a situation where there's some this is not going to work bias, it's very, very difficult to then organize around trying to execute on something that might be outside of BAU. I think for me, American Express had a very consensus-driven culture.
A very, driven
consensus-driven culture. I think they're sort of infamous for their consensus-driven culture, which might be described as like the opposite of Amazon's reputation. So it's things were just really slow, and in a competitive, dynamic market, if you're really slow to make decisions, and there's sort of I can't remember at the time because it was a while ago, but there were lots of new startups, new fintech startups coming in, trying to like nip away at like little edges of things that we were trying to bring to market. And by the time we got in consensus, it was too late, and the market had moved on. It had been 6 months. So you can miss your window of opportunity to act, but you can also, I think, get just malaise internally from those individuals who just don't have a lot of confidence that the organization is going to be bold enough to actually make some tough decisions, take a risk, right? So if you're in a risk avoidance culture, in many ways, if you can imagine with a brand, a history like American Express, they don't take a lot of, they're not a risk-seeking organization, which is sort of a bit dispiriting when you're in a role where often what you're trying to do is to encourage the organization to take risks to achieve outsized impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Difficult or doesn't quite match up.
Yeah.
It
can be quite frustrating. And then you start to feel like maybe, you're going through the motions, preparing strategy work. And that said, I did work on a few super exciting opportunities that were born like out of classic strategy work, sort of looking at the landscape, looking at the markets, like doing mapping, identifying opportunities, and then, those are sort of 1.5 to 2 year long pieces of strategic work, resulting in like international joint venture discussions and things like that. And that was super interesting, getting to see something all the way through. Yeah. Very satisfying.
Yeah, and the really interesting part, there's a few very interesting parts, but one of the things that really strikes me, hearing you talk through it is, and from many other people as well, is that when they talk about the big challenges of strategy work very rarely do they start with the decisions that are being made. So very rarely do people say, the most difficult thing was just coming to a decision about what we wanted to do, or the most difficult thing was the decision sucked. Yeah. So often it's around buy-in, execution, clarity within the team, and giving people the ownership and responsibility to feel part of it and feel like they can really make a difference.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's something that you experienced.
I've experienced a bit of everything, really. There were times when I felt really like this is working, this is how this process was designed and is delivering something that I will feel really proud to have been a part of. The nice thing about now being 10 years into my own business is that we get to set the strategy and and we get to drive the pace, and we get to drive the level of ambition, and we get to design, to decide how much risk we do or do not want to take. And so I think just being masters of your own destiny makes doing this strategy work and execution a lot more fun. Obviously, there's it's quite a roller coaster, especially in the beginning of becoming an entrepreneur. But none of it's accidental. Like we always have a strategy in a form of a written doc. Sort of that's revisited every quarter. My co-founder and I take a lot of walk and talks, and the strategy evolves over the course of a couple of hours, every few months as we're getting new information and sort of just recalibrating our hypotheses about where we want to take the direction of the company. Which I think has been really integral to our sort of, having been around 10 years, we've got very well capitalized. I would say that we have a really strong foundation as a startup or a scale up in UK. It's weathered quite a few different storms. And I think a lot of that is down to that sort of getting the fundamentals right.
Yep.
Which probably comes from having a relatively rigorous approach to strategic thinking.
Well, let's dig into that. So let's dig in more to the entrepreneurial journey that you've been on since the corporate side of your career. When that finished, you had an interesting first exposure to the world of entrepreneurship in your first venture. So maybe you just want to talk through that and then how it led to what you're driving today.
Yes. So when I was on maternity leave from when I was at American Express, I sort of got a promotion in absentia, and I think I said that right. And it was going to require a significant increase in the amount of travel that I needed to do, and I was already traveling every week anyway, and I just couldn't get my head around how I could make that work as a new mom. So that really sort of made me have a hard think about what I wanted to do, and I was able to leave the organization with a nice exit package, reduce my expenses dramatically, like put the brakes on outgoings, and then realize that I had the luxury of a good 18 months window of opportunity to be a bit more risk-seeking. And I found myself going to the Virgin Gym almost every day to take advantage of their 2 free hours on the on-site creche. You couldn't leave the premise, but you could get 2 free hours of childcare. And I noticed that a lot of other parents were doing the same thing. And so I had the idea to open an off-site high street creche that provided pay-as-you-go, flexible, nursery-quality childcare in North London, which is a really sort of vibrant community full of lots of parents.
Round the corner from here.
Middle-class parents. Didn't have 3 nannies at home, but could definitely afford, an hourly rate while they got their hair done or went to work or whatever. And so I talked the creche manager into leaving with me because he already had relationships with every mom and dad in the area. And we opened up exactly that, London's first pay-as-you-go creche, which was just so much fun, a really steep learning curve. I never had like a commercial property before. I had to bring, I had a co-founder who came in who knew everything about, it's a highly regulated industry. So that was really fun and interesting. And for the first time since for a long time that I can remember, I just woke up at, the crack of dawn, just wanting to jump out of bed and my brain buzzing with all different kinds of ideas around what we could do, how we could acquire new parents, how we could delight our customers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just super energizing. And I did, though, relatively quickly realize that it was going to be a passive income lifestyle business that afforded me free childcare, but that it wasn't going to be a replacement for a full-time job.
Yep.
And my co-founder, Tess, and I, who, as you mentioned, we actually both met at business school. And over the years, we had flirted with a number of entrepreneurial ideas and even spent about 4 months when we were both on maternity leave before this, sort of setting up not a small business. We had an idea. We set it up. We ended up going our separate ways. So long story short is we came back together and this time said, okay, we definitely want to do a business together. What can we do? We've got 30 years of experience in the corporate world. We're a pretty safe pair of hands from an investment point of view. And what are we passionate about? The environment. So we did a really classic consulting, basically sort of stepped back, took a look at, we knew we wanted to do a marketplace. Mm-hmm. I won't go through all of the details of how we approached it, but we did sort of, did a big, I can't remember what it is, but basically opportunity mapping exercise globally, looking at B2B marketplaces, which is for some reason what we had, I can't quite remember, narrowed it down to. And we went out and talked to lots of people, etc. But we sort of came up empty-handed. Either it was just not a lot of appetite at that point in time for digitizing a lot of the informal ways that waste streams are managed around in the UK and around the world, actually, if you're thinking about plastic and metal and all different kinds of things. And we probably were biting off more than we could chew looking at B2B marketplaces. Mm-hmm. And during that time, Tessa had an experience where she was moving house. She was moving back from Switzerland to the UK, and she had assumed she'd be able to pack some food that was non-perishable into her packing boxes. And the people who were helping her move said, absolutely not, no food. So she went out in the middle of winter on the street and tried to find someone to give it to. And she couldn't, so she wasn't going to throw it away. She ended up smuggling it back anyway. And so that was the light bulb moment. We realized there was a sharing app for everything. They were popping up, Airbnb, Uber, everything was sort of popping up at that time. Why not one for food? We had absolutely no idea, given our respective backgrounds, that food waste was such a massive environmental issue, with 40% of the world's food that is produced never eaten. I could go on and on about just how awful it is. And the sort of twin evil is that, so many millions of people are going to bed hungry. So neighbor-to-neighbor sharing app connecting households who are responsible for over 70% of surplus food in the UK and abroad. To share the surplus food was the genesis of Olio. Now you can share anything on the app, non-food. You can buy and sell non-food. And by non-food, I mean books, toys, clothes, any household item. You can lend and borrow. And also we provide a service to businesses whereby we match over 100,000 food safety trained volunteers from our community of 8 million app users with businesses who, at the end of the day, have their surplus unsold food picked up by volunteers who then take that food home and they keep 10% of the food themselves as their sort of reward or thank you, and then they give the rest away to the community for free from their own home. So it's a business surplus food to volunteer redistributing food to the community model. And we crossed 100 million meals donated for free to the community from businesses in December.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And obviously that's how we get paid for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of directions we go in now in terms of questions, but initially, how was that journey from going from two people, two founders in a room, mapping out opportunities, trying to understand where are the challenges that align with the purpose and what we're trying to solve, but also solve a problem for consumers in this case, to what you are today, which is how many employees?
We're 60 now. We sort of peaked around 110 2 years ago and have come right back down. Well, there's a lot that's happened over the last 10 years. And there's sort of pre-autumn of 2001, zero interest rate environment, and then post, when the sort of paradigm shifted in terms of what was expected, or from venture capitalists and other investors of startups. So prior to that, we were very much part of the, sort of the high growth startup fast track. So we went down the venture capital route. We raised multiple rounds of funding. Tess and I think, are in the top 10 in terms of amount of capital raised by female founders in the UK ever. And we're very methodical in terms of how we did that. So at each round, we would we would build a model. We would basically figure out what benchmarks were required along what metrics in order to raise the next round, which we would sanity check that by talking with lots of investors who raised at that round. So what are the Series A benchmarks we need to achieve? If we're raising our pre-Series A, we're here. And then it's basically, you can do the maths between how much money you need to raise, how much dilution you're willing to accept, how you're going to spend the money that you raise, and how that is going to then move the dial on the metrics that you need to move. And will it get to the point whereby you're considered investable 6 months before you need the cash at your next round?
It's the what should be true way of thinking, almost.
I guess so, yeah. So we really talked to every founder we knew, listened to every podcast that we could, and basically realized, did pattern recognition. We realized, I think we just tried to become experts as much as we could on how startups interact with investors, successfully pitch to investors, sell a vision to investors, raise money from investors, repeat, deliver on that so that they're investable so they can do it again. And so that was our approach. It was very methodical and it worked. And we're also very conservative. We never waited till the last minute to raise money. We've always been very conservative from a financial perspective. So that's one side of it, right? Which is how we funded and built a business. We were 2 people when we went out and raised our first, our seed round, which we raised from Excel, which hardly ever does seed rounds. But the reason they did it is because the TAM, the addressable market for what we're trying to solve, is absolutely massive. So well over $1 trillion worth of food goes to waste every year. So that's a really big market inefficiency. And things like marketplaces, which is ultimately what we are, can help to match supply and demand to eradicate and monetize that inefficiency. And I think given their backgrounds, we were able to articulate this in a way that was oh yeah, that's a big market inefficiency. That's what startups do, is they, go in,
identify a problem and solve.
Exactly.
At scale.
In theory, this all looks great on paper. We're very good at pitching, I think, if I do say so myself. So there was the sort of what I might call the nuts and bolts and the I would almost call it the unsexy part of what you're doing, because you need to raise capital in order to hire a team, in order to build your product, et cetera, et cetera. So that was that. But then the other part of it was we need to create a movement, right? We needed to get people to volunteer in the tens of thousands. We've got almost 200,000 volunteers now, because they believe in what we're doing and they think that we can help make the world more like a place that they want to live in and raise their children in. And so that required us to lean into a very different sort of strategy or different approach, which is around, which I think was new to both of us, and it was quite intuitive. We both came from business backgrounds, so it was actually easier to figure out how to play the startup game, quote unquote, than it was how to galvanize, communities, to meet in real life, to share things that would otherwise go to waste with each other. The thing with food is it's perishable, so you need to build a hyper-local marketplace and you need to have network density so that you can basically, within the food's still good and fresh, there's someone who can offer it, and then there's someone nearby who wants it. So hyper-local markreplaces are notoriously difficult to build, and a lot of people thought we were crazy. The advantage of food, though, is that people eat 3 times a day, so the repeat use case is there. And I think a lot of that actually was just that wasn't by design. A lot of that was just opportunistic, and we didn't set out to, for example, build a grassroots voluntary network to go out, and that's really how it grew for the most part. We spent very, very little on marketing, although we had a brief period where we went crazy after our Series B on marketing. Generally speaking, we've got 70,000 signups every month, and they're all organic, that kind of thing. So I think that was about just responding. That was it wasn't even trial and error. It was that when we talked authentically and passionately about the problem that we're trying to solve and the vision of what we could, collectively do to address it, like it just drew people in. Like people really love the idea. No one wants to waste food. No one wants people to go without when there's neighbors next door who've got more than enough. So that, I think when you've got something that's got a really strong mission, it's not that the mission can sell itself, but like if it's a really strong mission, it can definitely be a superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And
sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, it was a very long answer, but it was a very, very insightful, interesting answer. And there's a specific point you raised about the direction you went in. So you never set out to build a community of volunteers. Originally, when you set out, it was specifically to solve this challenge, this problem of food waste. Yes. But off the back of that, you have 100,000 volunteers. You have the ability now on the app to sell or trade or give away various different items. How did you make those choices around what to do and which adjacencies to move into, as well as what not to do? Because I'm sure there were plenty of harebrained ideas or very good ideas that you then decided to park.
Yes, and there's many things that we've launched and then retired, of course. But so at any given point in time, we've got a roadmap, a product roadmap, and that is, usually have roadmaps that aren't just product operations, etc. But if the product roadmap sort of really shapes the experience for the end user, and we sort of know with certainty what we're doing in the next quarter, and then we've got a lot of post-it notes over the next 3 quarters that follow, so looking forward 12 months. And then we've just got a massive wall over here on the corner with like post-it notes that haven't been prioritized or sequenced. And generally, like not real post-it notes, obviously, although there are real post-it notes all over the wall here. So if I had an office like this, we're fully remote, we would have post-it notes on the wall.
Yeah.
But let's say that so right now our strategy is to make Olio more useful to more people. That's sort of like an overarching approach to how we're thinking about prioritization and resource allocation. So the ideas competing to help us get closer to that, we have to understand if the various different use cases that we could build, like for all of the audiences that include more people, right? Because more useful is more use cases, more frequency, more people it's our existing users, it's our dormant users, it's people who don't use Olio at all, but who we think might like Olio, it's people who we don't think will ever use Olio at all. And so like we've got different segments that we need to temperature check. We do focus groups, we do surveys, we do all different kinds of ways to basically get information.
With existing users as well as with other groups as well.
Absolutely. We do a lot of 15-minute calls. If you participate, you get £10 kind of stuff. So a lot of times we can usually get to existing users and dormant users. It's a little bit harder. We don't do it as frequently to non-existing users, but there's that. So it's a lot of customer feedback, I guess is what I would say. They can help shape the agenda. A lot of surveys. It's also a lot of like looking at competitive, like what the trends are in the competitive landscape. So when we launched Buy and Sell of non-food, it was really clear that this went Vinted and Depop and all these vertical marketplaces were taking off. We're a horizontal marketplace, right? We're not a vertical marketplace. It's very different. It just became really clear that we needed to, obviously we did a lot of work to support whether or not that was the right, because you can only build so many things at once, whether or not that was the right thing to build at that time. So you're trying to basically understand, optimizing for maximum impact for the best return on your investment, however that's defined, people time, marketing time, if you have to basically market to whole new users and get new users in who currently don't use Olio on the hope that they're going to then use Olio for this use case.
More difficult to do than existing users to try to get them to...
More expensive. So we're sort of... So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
Going about prioritizing.
It's a bit of a cost-benefit analysis to understand.
It is.
Where should we be putting our chips?
Exactly, and that's an ongoing process of reallocation of time prioritization. That we have to do that sets the agenda for how the app's evolving.
I want to pick up on something that you said way back at the beginning, which was related to the challenges of getting buy-in and ownership and responsibility, but also clarity on what you're doing as an organization within the team. And then you were referencing American Express. Now, as co-founder of Olio and with the team that you've built, how do you go about overcoming that challenge, especially with an organization which is, as you said, completely remote?
So the thing I forgot to mention on the previous question is that you then need to filter all of the options through, we use our values framework. So what's our mission? What are our values? We have 4 values. So we could come up with a lot of use cases that people might be interested in, but if they don't fit with our mission and values, then they're not gonna get prioritized. So coming back to the values I think is the organizing framework that we use for just about everything, from throughout the recruitment process, through 360, assessment, through our prioritization process. It's just baked into absolutely everything, and it's definitely sort of something that we probably both brought with us, or a respect for the values, embedding values. Probably brought that from our consulting days, because we've just seen how it can really work when you've got something that everyone signed up to and aligned around. So is the question, how do we lead the team to execute against
and
priorities?
Exactly, and how do you track progress?
Well, so it's interesting because on the one hand, we do probably what you would consider relatively best practice approach, right? So we've got, we do an annual strategy setting process that's like bottom up and top down, and then reconciled with our year-end targets and different scenario analysis, or scenario best, conservative, whatever, worst case scenarios. On the other hand, we have learned that for an organization our size, that we are really a founder-led company. And being a founder-led company means there are such things as founder cards, which means you can sort of just, I hate to say this, but you just like upend the strategy. You can put the founder card on the table. Yeah, and so it's like we don't want to have such a rigorous approach. Tessa, my co-founder, and I are very rigorous in how we think about it, and we have this running Google Doc, but we don't necessarily share it with the team, because for them it's probably a bit disorienting, honestly, to see how much we might lean into a particular approach for a while, or a particular sort of, we might have a really strong hypothesis and like go off and talk to a bunch of people, or do some back of the envelope math, or, and the rest of the team would be like, oh crap, what are they doing now? Like, where are we going? Like, so we basically need to carve out a lot of that sort of, because we're still in product market fit mode. We're still trying to launch new products, find product market fit. If we don't, then we need to retire that product or use case. So there's a lot of that still 0 to 1 stuff that's going on that we need to sort of keep away from the team, and we need to just be focused on more like BAU of our existing products. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we do an annual strategy setting process, but we've learned the hard way that if we make it too rigorous, that actually it can be counterproductive when we need to then sort of blow it up a bit midway through the year. And so I think we sort of do a relatively light touch. But every team has team objectives that they set per quarter. Every individual has team objectives. They're all SMART objectives. We measure them red, amber, green. It's in the bottom of everyone's weekly update. It's just full visibility and like ongoing, nothing one thing I think is really important is like never make a framework or a template and then don't actually check to make sure people fill it out.
Yeah, definitely.
So
you need to build, you need to exercise the muscle, or build and exercise the muscle.
Yeah, so we have a whole like system of cascading objectives and making sure, and basically, what's the word? Checks and balances to make sure that everyone completes and updates so that we've got real information, because old information, incomplete information, it's just not very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but just a final question. What's next for the organization as it scales, it grows, and as you explore other avenues as well?
So making Olio more useful to more people has been our strategy for quite a while. But we're in the middle of transitioning to making Olio more useful for more businesses. So it's quite a bit of a shift. We've spent a lot of our resources on the consumer side. It's maybe been more like 70-30 consumer business, and we're in the middle of flipping it, reallocating in product and engineering resources, and really now going through the journey of understanding what our current customers, retailers, caterers, etc., as well as those that we don't yet work with, what are the gaps in the market and how we can like bring solutions to them to help them address their food waste. And so it's really about developing that full one-stop shop proposition that we have for the consumers, and now developing that for the businesses, which we can then take international.
Fantastic. Well, look, really appreciate the time. Really appreciate a very, very insightful, interesting conversation that spanned very corporate roles and very corporate learnings all the way through to incredibly entrepreneurial ones. So thank you very much, and look forward to speaking more soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.